Truistory Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistory Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Marlowe Reyes had always been a planner. The kind of girl who color-coded her college notebooks, made 3 versions of her 5-year career plan, and could tell you down to the day when she wanted to buy her first home. Her vision board had a Charleston Beach wedding, barefoot in the sand, a string quartet playing Clair de Lune, and her dad walking her down the aisle to a man who looked at her like she was everything. But instead, she stood outside the back door of a red brick colonial in suburban Minnesota. 7 weeks pregnant, in a borrowed ivory dress that didn't quite fit, waiting for her mother-in-law to unlock the door. Only proper wives walk through the front. Evelyn Dade had said the night before, her voice clipped and tight like every word had been ironed stiff. "You're already pregnant. This is just a formality." Chris, her college boyfriend, now her soon-to-be husband, had laughed it off. "She's old school, babe. Don't take it personally." But it felt personal. All of it did. The makeshift wedding setup in the backyard was cute in a rushed, Pinterest fail kind of way. Folding chairs rented last minute lined the grass, a few string lights sagged under the weight of dew, and someone was playing a wedding playlist from a Bluetooth speaker that kept cutting out. There was no aisle, no bridesmaids, no bridal shower. Just 2 families coming together because they had to. Marlowe's father, Samuel Reyes, stood near the fence, tugging at his collar. He looked like he might disappear if someone asked him how he felt. Finally, the back door creaked open. Evelyn stood there in a beige dress and a harder stare. "You're early," she said flatly. "I wanted to be ready," Marlowe said. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in." Inside, the kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner and tension. Evelyn didn't offer her a seat. She motioned toward a stool by the island.
sit.
"But don't lean back. You're already showing. We don't want the dress bunching." Marlowe sat down slowly. Her hands rested awkwardly in her lap. She'd painted her nails nude the night before with shaking fingers. One already had a chip. She stared at it like it could explain how her life had derailed so quickly. "Is Chris around?" she asked.
Getting dressed.
"He's got enough to deal with today. Try not to distract him." Try not to distract him. As if she were some complication. A problem. Marlowe blinked hard, swallowing the burn in her throat. She wanted to say something. Anything. But what could she say that wouldn't sound like begging? Outside, she heard the officiant arrive.
Chairs scraping.
Glasses clinking. People murmuring in polite tones. Evelyn checked her watch and looked back at Marlowe. "You'll go down the side path, not the front porch." No reason to turn this into a spectacle. Marlowe nearly laughed.
What spectacle?
There were fewer than 30 people in attendance, mostly Chris's extended family and a couple of coworkers who felt too awkward to decline the invite. None of her friends from college were there. None of her girls from book club. She'd told them, "It's just a small thing, short notice." What she didn't tell them was that she didn't want them to see her like this. Marrying under pressure. Swelling underlace that didn't belong to her. Feeling less like a bride and more like a bystander in her own life. A soft knock tapped on the glass. Her dad poked his head in. "Hey, baby. It's time." Marlowe stood. Evelyn gave her one last scan and turned away. Her father extended his arm. As she hooked hers through it, he leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat had closed up. She nodded instead, smiling as best she could. Samuel kissed her temple and opened the side gate. They stepped outside. No one stood. There were no gasps, no tears. Just a few phones lifted. Someone coughed. Chris stood under a white arbor wrapped in silk flowers, looking like a corporate model groom. His face was handsome and polite, but unreadable. Not exactly nervous. Not exactly thrilled. Just present. Marlowe walked slowly toward him, counting her breaths. 1, For the girl who once believed in perfect love.
2.
For the woman who had believed in timing.
3.
For the child she now carried.
4.
For the future she wasn't sure she wanted. When she reached Chris, he smiled gently. "You look great," he whispered.
"Thanks," she said.
Her voice felt like a ghost in her throat. The officiant began. The words didn't land. Vows were exchanged, not from the heart, but from a printed script. Rings were slipped on fingers. And the kiss, it barely grazed her lips, like checking off a box. Everyone clapped. Even that sounded restrained. The reception was just a catered dinner in the backyard with fairy lights and watered-down champagne. Chris disappeared within 20 minutes to laugh with his college friends. Evelyn circled the yard like a school principal, stopping at Marlowe's side every so often with unsolicited critiques. "Straighten your back. A Dade woman doesn't slouch. Hold your glass from the stem. Don't eat so fast." Marlowe smiled, nodded,
Took a deep breath.
and stayed silent. By 9 p.m., the crowd had thinned out. Evelyn had gone inside. Chris was nowhere to be found. Marlowe slipped away to the upstairs guest room where she'd left her overnight bag. The wedding dress fell to the floor with a whisper. She pulled on a simple cotton sundress. When she looked up into the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The girl who used to smile from her eyes was gone, replaced by someone who looked quiet.
Dimmed.
Marlowe sat on the edge of the bed, ran a hand over her belly, and whispered something, not to herself, but to the little life growing inside. "I don't know how we got here, but I promise, I won't let this be the end of me." The morning after the wedding, Marlowe woke up to the sound of birds and the smell of bleach. It was 6:12 a.m. outside the window. The light was soft golden, like the kind she used to associate with calm.
Peace.
But in the Dade household, golden mornings came with expectations. She sat up slowly, her body still sore, her heart even more so. Chris was gone. His side of the bed had been cold for hours. She'd heard him come in late, probably past midnight, after going out for one last beer with his groomsmen. He hadn't bothered to kiss her goodnight. Just peeled off his jacket and collapsed beside her, the scent of alcohol and aftershave trailing behind. The room was silent now, except for footsteps downstairs and drawers opening and closing. Marlowe stood, changed into sweatpants and a plain tee, and made her way down. She passed framed portraits of Chris's childhood, soccer trophies, braces, honor roll certificates. A wall full of memories she didn't belong to. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, wiping down the counters in emotions so vigorous it bordered on aggressive. "Good, you're up," Evelyn said, not bothering to turn around. "You slept in." "It's barely 6, Marlowe replied gently. "Dade women start early." Evelyn finally turned, eyeing Marlowe's clothes. "That shirt clings. Maybe wear looser things from now on. For modesty." Marlowe swallowed her sigh. "Noted. There's toast on the table. And some fruit. Don't eat anything spicy. It'll make the nausea worse." Then, a pause. "You are still feeling nauseous, aren't you?" "Sometimes." "Humph. I never had morning sickness. I suppose it depends on the kind of woman." The comment hovered in the air like smoke. Marlowe ate silently, chewing toast that tasted like cardboard. Evelyn paced the kitchen, muttering about laundry and sweeping and reorganizing the pantry. This wasn't a home, it was a machine. And Marlowe had just been inserted into it like a cog. By the time Chris appeared, dressed in business casual, sipping coffee he hadn't made himself, the air was already thick with quiet tension. "Hey," he said, kissing her on the head without looking. "I've got a morning meeting. Back by lunch." "You're working already?" she asked. "Yeah, just some onboarding stuff for the new account." He grabbed his keys and turned to his mother. "Thanks for breakfast, Mom." Evelyn beamed.
Chris left.
Marlowe didn't say a word. That first week felt like an endless list of unspoken rules. Don't leave dishes in the sink. Use coasters. Fold towels in thirds, not halves. Dinner is at 6. Not 6:15. Not whenever. If Evelyn wasn't commenting on her posture or her cooking, She was critiquing how much time Marlowe spent resting. "You're pregnant, not sick," she'd say, handing Marlowe a rag. "Wipe down the baseboards." "You're eating again," she said once. After Marlowe tried to grab a yogurt at 3 p.m. "You breathe heavily when you sleep. Try to nap quietly." Marlowe tried to let it go. She told herself this was just an adjustment period. Evelyn wasn't cruel. She was just particular. Chris had warned her after all. "My mom's intense, but she means well." But meaning well and being kind weren't the same thing. Some nights, Marlowe would retreat early to their room just to feel alone. Chris would follow hours later, sometimes drunk, sometimes silent. He no longer kissed her like he meant it. When she rested her hand on his chest, he flinched, not with disgust, but detachment. It felt like living with a roommate who owed you rent and affection, and was months behind. One Saturday, the three of them sat down for lunch. Evelyn had made roast chicken and green beans. The table was quiet except for the scrape of forks on ceramic. "So," Evelyn said, slicing her meat delicately, "have you given any thought to baby names?" Marlowe perked up a little. "Actually, I liked the name Nova for a girl." Evelyn paused.
Nova.
Sounds like a car model. What about Catherine? Or Grace? Something classic. "Nova means new," Marlowe said. "It feels right." Evelyn didn't respond. Chris didn't either. Later that evening, Marlowe overheard Evelyn telling Chris in the kitchen, "Letting her pick the name is a mistake. You think that name will sound respectable on a job application." That night, Marlowe cried quietly in the shower. The only peace Marlowe found was in the backyard. There was an old bench near the hydrangeas that Evelyn never used. Marlowe would sit there with a notebook, sketching or journaling, just to feel something of herself again. One day, while sitting outside, she heard the neighbor's teenage daughter laugh as she rode by on her bike, music blasting from a phone in her basket. Marlowe closed her eyes and imagined being 16 again. No ring on her finger. No mother-in-law. No growing life inside her that tethered her to a man drifting further away by the day. She loved her baby. She knew that with certainty. But some days, she wasn't sure she loved the life that came with it. One afternoon, after folding the third load of laundry, Marlowe sat down with Chris in the living room. "I've been thinking," she began slowly. "Maybe after the baby's born, we could look into our own place." Chris didn't look up from his phone.
"Why?" he said.
"I just think it'd be easier.
"For us."
For me. We're saving money here, but I don't feel like I belong."
Chris sighed.
"My mom's just trying to help. She cooks, she cleans. Do you know how lucky you are?"
Lucky.
That word stayed in her chest like a thorn. On the third week, her father called. "How are you holding up?" Samuel asked.
"I'm okay."
"You don't sound okay." There was a pause. Then her voice cracked. "It's just hard, Dad. Then come home. Even for a weekend." "I can't." Evelyn would never allow it. "She says it's improper for a married woman to run back to Daddy." Samuel's voice was calm, but steel underneath. "You're not trapped, sweetheart. You're never trapped." She wanted to believe that. Days became weeks. Marlowe counted time in meals and arguments. Once, Evelyn criticized how she'd seasoned the rice. Another time, she told Marlowe her prenatal vitamins were a bit much. Marlowe wanted to scream,
To throw something.
but all she did was smile. Until one morning, Chris had left early again. Marlowe was in the kitchen, trying to make pancakes, her first craving in weeks. Evelyn walked in and immediately grimaced. "Is that syrup?" "Yes," Marlowe said. "That's too much sugar for someone pregnant. No wonder you're bloated." And that was it. Marlowe dropped the spatula. Her hands trembled. "You know what, Evelyn?" she said. "I may be pregnant, but I'm still a human being. I'm tired.
I'm overwhelmed."
And I'm trying." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "No," Marlowe said. "You watch how you treat people. I'm not your maid. I'm not your doormat. I'm the mother of your grandchild. You're lucky we let you stay here." "I'm not lucky," Marlowe said. I'm surviving. She turned off the stove and left the pancakes half-cooked, marched upstairs,
Close the door.
and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to fall apart. That night, Chris came home late again. Marlowe confronted him. I can't keep doing this. Living like this. Then don't, he said, shrugging off his coat. Nobody's stopping you. And just like that, something inside her shifted. He wasn't going to fight for her. So, maybe she needed to fight for herself. It was a Thursday when Marlowe packed her bag. Not a suitcase, just a canvas tote she'd gotten for free during college orientation. Inside, she placed a change of clothes, her prenatal journal, the half-used bottle of stretch mark cream she kept in the nightstand, and a tiny pair of socks she bought in secret when she first found out she was pregnant. She didn't take much. She couldn't. It wasn't about running away. It was about preserving the last bit of herself that hadn't already been swallowed by obligation. Chris was at work. Evelyn was at her weekly church brunch. The house, for once, was quiet. She left a note on the kitchen table. I'll be with my father for a few days. I need space. Please don't come after me. Marlowe. She didn't expect them to listen, but she wrote it anyway. Her father opened the front door in slippers and a hoodie that said, "World's okayest dad." He looked like he hadn't shaved in days. Hey, Bug, he said, stepping aside. You didn't call first. I didn't want to give myself time to chicken out. He took the bag from her, placed it gently on the hallway bench, and pulled her into a hug. She didn't know how much she'd needed that until her chest heaved.
She cried.
For the first time in weeks. For the first time without needing to muffle it behind a bathroom door. Samuel didn't ask questions. He let her fall apart. When she finished, he made grilled cheese and tomato soup, put on an old sitcom, and sat beside her like she was 10 years old again. Stay as long as you want, he said. You're home. Marlowe slept for 11 hours that night. She dreamed of water, endless ocean waves, where she floated peacefully, weightless and unseen. When she woke up, the heaviness in her limbs had lifted slightly. She opened the window, let the breeze in, and made tea. Her father had already gone to work. A sticky note on the fridge read, "Leftover lasagna. Don't forget you're still a badass." For the next few days, she barely touched her phone. She didn't check social media. She didn't open texts. She didn't respond to Chris's single-line message. You can't just walk out mid-pregnancy. There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "Do you need anything?" Just blame. Framed as logic. Classic Chris. On the fourth morning, Marlowe stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection. The girl she saw wasn't weak. She was tired, frayed at the edges. But there was still steel under the surface. She had made it out. Now, the question was, what came next? Her phone buzzed that afternoon. It was a call from Evelyn. She hesitated, then answered. Marlowe. Hello, Evelyn. There was a long pause. The kind of silence that usually came before a reprimand. We haven't told anyone you left, Evelyn said. Out of respect. Respect, Marlowe repeated. This family has a reputation to protect. And I have a life to protect. Another pause. You're hormonal. I understand. But you're married now. You have responsibilities. So do you. As a mother-in-law. As a woman. But you've used tradition as an excuse to be cruel. I was trying to prepare you for real life.
No.
You were trying to mold me into someone who wouldn't threaten your control.
Click.
The call ended. Marlowe didn't cry. She felt light. Chris didn't call for another 2 days. When he did, his tone was different. Look, he said, maybe we got off to a rough start. Maybe. I'm not saying you didn't have a reason to be upset. But leaving the house, just disappearing, wasn't fair. Neither was being invisible in my own marriage. Can we meet? Marlowe paused. Neutral ground.
A café. Fine.
They met on a Sunday afternoon at a quiet coffee shop near the river. Chris wore his usual polo and khakis. He looked polished. The way he always did when he was nervous. When he needed to win someone over. Marlowe wore no makeup. Her hair was in a messy braid. She didn't need polish. She needed peace. They ordered drinks, sat across from each other like ex-coworkers. "You look good," Chris said. "I feel tired," Marlowe replied. He gave a soft chuckle. "I deserve that." She didn't laugh. Chris stirred his coffee. "I've been thinking. Maybe we rushed everything. Maybe the pressure got to both of us." "You think?" "What I mean is, maybe we can start over. Just us. New apartment."
No, Mom.
That caught her attention. "You'd leave Evelyn's house? If that's what it takes." Marlowe blinked. "Why now?" "Because I miss you." "Or because your image is crumbling?" Chris didn't answer. "You're used to things looking good on the outside," Marlowe said. "But love isn't a display. It's not a performance." "I'm trying here." "Are you?" Chris leaned forward. "I want this baby. I want you. You want the version of me that doesn't challenge you. That folds laundry the way your mom likes. That says yes even when my heart says no." He looked away. "You promised me once that we'd be partners," she said softly. "But I've been alone since the day I said I do." The silence between them was heavy. "I'm not saying I won't co-parent," Marlowe added. "But I'm saying I can't be your wife anymore." Chris's jaw clenched. But he didn't argue. When Marlowe returned to her father's house, she exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Today I chose myself. And it didn't feel selfish. It felt like survival." A week later, she filed for divorce.
Chris didn't fight it.
Evelyn never called again. In the months that followed, Marlowe found part-time work managing social media for a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Her belly grew round and radiant. Her laughter came back. Her father built a crib in the guest room and painted the walls pale yellow. She read parenting books. She took long walks. She cried, often, but not always out of sadness. Sometimes, healing sounds like sobbing into a pillow at 2 a.m. Sometimes, it sounds like a deep breath before speaking your truth out loud. On a windy afternoon in October, Marlowe went into labor. Samuel held her hand all the way to the hospital. The nurses called him Grandpa Coach. He cried louder than she did when the baby was born. A girl. 10 fingers. 10 toes. And the strongest cry Marlowe had ever heard. She named her Nova. Not because she was new, but because she had exploded into Marlowe's life with light. Late that night, after everyone had left, Marlowe sat in the hospital bed, cradling Nova in her arms. Outside the window, the moon was full, quiet, watching. Marlowe leaned down and whispered into her daughter's ear, "I won't let anyone silence your voice. You're allowed to be loud. You're allowed to be bold. And you'll never have to cry without witnesses." 3 months after Nova was born, Marlowe found herself returning to the city. Not to Chris, not to the Dade house, but to a courtroom. The divorce proceedings were quiet, procedural. Chris showed up with his lawyer and a new haircut. Marlowe came with her father and the diaper bag. Nova slept through most of it, cradled in a sling against her mother's chest. The judge asked if both parties agreed to the terms.
They did. No alimony.
Shared custody, though Nova would remain primarily with Marlowe until she turned 2. Chris requested visitation rights every other weekend. Marlowe didn't object. There was nothing left to argue for. But when they stepped out into the hall, Chris cleared his throat and said something that shifted the air. "She was born last month. The other baby." Marlowe froze. "What?" "Her name is Scarlet." "Scarlet."
Red. Sharp.
Dangerous. It fit.
Somehow.
"You have another daughter," Marlowe said, more to herself than to him.
Yeah.
"So, we both have baby girls." "I guess so." He said it like he was talking about car models, not children. "Does she live with you?"
No.
"Her mother's complicated." "Like you?" Marlowe asked. Chris didn't answer. "Is she going to meet Nova?" "Eventually. They're sisters." Marlowe looked down at Nova, whose tiny fingers clutched the fabric of her shirt. "You don't get to say that," she said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." That night, Back at her father's house, Marlowe stared at Nova for hours. Scarlett. Another child. Another little girl who hadn't asked for any of this. What kind of father would Chris be to her? Would she be the favorite? The replacement? Marlowe shook her head, ashamed of her thoughts. Nova was enough. Nova was everything. In the weeks that followed, Chris's visits were inconsistent. Sometimes he'd show up, smile tight, hands clumsy. He'd hold Nova like she was glass, say things like, "Look how big you've gotten," then disappear for another 10 days. Other times, he canceled last minute. Emergency at work. Scarlett's mom had a breakdown. Car trouble. The excuses piled up like dust. Marlowe stopped expecting him. She stopped preparing bottles in advance. Stopped laying out Nova's pinkest outfits on Saturdays. Stopped waiting by the window. But Nova noticed. Even at 6 months, she knew when the energy shifted. She'd cry longer on Sundays. Look toward the door when it opened. Wriggle more in her crib at night. And every time she did, Marlowe whispered, "You are not forgettable. You are not an afterthought." One day, Chris called and asked for something unexpected. "Can I bring Scarlett to meet Nova?" Marlowe's stomach dropped. "Are you serious? They're sisters." Don't say that word like it erases everything else. "Marlowe, please. Just once. I want them to grow up knowing each other." "Why now?" "Because she looks like me, and Nova looks like you, and I think it'll matter to them one day." She almost laughed. "You think one meeting makes up for what you've done?"
No.
"But it's a start." After a long silence, Marlowe said, "1 hour. In the park. Neutral ground." They met under the sycamore trees at Willow Glen Park. Chris arrived pushing a stroller. A woman trailed behind him, tall, blonde, expressionless. She wore sunglasses and held her phone like a weapon. Scarlett was beautiful, curly-haired, pouty-lipped, cheeks like polished apples. Nova sat in Marlowe's lap, wearing her sun hat and wide eyes. For a moment, the babies stared at each other,
Silent. Curious.
Scarlett reached out and touched Nova's hand.
Nova jigled.
Scarlett blinked, then squealed. It was so pure, so untouched by the mess their parents had made, that Marlowe nearly cried. "They like each other," Chris said softly. Marlowe didn't respond. The blonde woman, Scarlett's mother, she presumed, stood far off, scrolling Instagram. Chris crouched beside Marlowe. "Thank you for this." "Don't thank me. Thank them. They did all the work." Later, as they packed up to leave, the woman finally approached. "You're the first wife," she said flatly. "And you're the second affair," Marlowe replied without missing a beat. The woman raised an eyebrow, then smirked. "Guess we both got played. Difference is, I was in love." The smirk faded. "And now," Marlowe said, lifting Nova into her arms, "I'm finally awake." Back home, Marlowe sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She began writing a letter. Not to Chris, not to Scarlett's mother, but to Nova. "One day, you might meet your half-sister again. And maybe you'll wonder why your family looks like a puzzle someone forced pieces into. But know this. You were never a mistake. You were never Plan B. You were the reason I chose to save myself. You were the beginning of something real." She printed the letter, folded it, slipped it into a box labeled Nova's Firsts. Inside were her hospital bracelet, her first pacifier, and now her mother's first truth. The night Marlowe decided not to cry anymore, she found herself standing on the front porch with Nova bundled in her arms, staring at her father's door like it might open by magic. But this wasn't her first time here. Samuel had become more than just a grandfather. He was a safe harbor in the storm Marlowe hadn't seen coming. Every time she walked up that path, it wasn't as a failed wife or single mother. It was simply as his daughter. When he opened the door, hair still damp from a late shower, and a dish towel slung over his shoulder, he smiled in that crooked way that made her chest ache. "You came home," he said. "I didn't know where else to go. This will always be the first place." He stepped aside and let her in. Nova was teething. Marlowe hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. There were dark smudges beneath her eyes and formula stains on her hoodie, but she didn't care anymore. "Dad," she said that night while warming a bottle. "Have you ever felt like your life was built wrong from the foundation up?" Samuel poured himself a mug of tea and leaned against the counter. "Like a crooked house?" "Yeah." "You can tear it down," he said. "Start over. It's harder, but the next build is better." "I don't want to rebuild anything. I just want peace." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Sometimes peace doesn't come from building. Sometimes it comes from closing doors." Marlowe stayed for 2 weeks. It wasn't the plan, but plans hadn't meant much to her lately. She began helping Samuel with his garden. They'd dig rows for tomatoes while Nova played on a blanket under the oak tree. In the afternoons, she read aloud to Nova from old classics. Not because Nova understood, but because Marlowe needed the sound of her own voice, saying beautiful things. "How long are you planning to stay, Bug?" Samuel asked one morning. Marlowe looked at Nova, who was squealing at a patch of sun. "Until she can laugh without crying first." Samuel nodded. He understood in a way only a father could. On a rainy Wednesday, an envelope arrived at the mailbox. It was from Chris. No return address. Just his stiff handwriting across the front. Inside was a single page and a photo of Nova sleeping in the hospital, the one Marlowe had never shared publicly. The letter read, "I know I've failed you. I know I've failed her. But I look at that photo every night and wonder what kind of man I'd have to become to deserve either of you again. I don't know if I'll get there. But I'm trying." There was no apology. But there was something else. A flicker of realness. Still, Marlowe folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't show it to Samuel. Some doors weren't meant to be reopened. That evening, as thunder rolled overhead, Nova clung to Marlowe tighter than usual. The storm outside matched the one inside her chest, quiet, but brewing. One day, Marlowe whispered to her daughter, "You'll ask why we lived in Grandpa's house. Why I left. Why your dad wasn't there." She paused, kissed the baby's forehead. "And I'll tell you the truth, no matter how ugly or unfair. Because you deserve truth more than comfort." The next morning, Marlowe made a decision. She wouldn't wait for the pieces of her life to fall into place. She'd shape new ones. She called a local daycare and asked about part-time enrollment. She updated her resume. She reached out to an old friend who worked at a nonprofit downtown. The world was still spinning. And Marlowe? She was learning how to walk on it again. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's failure. But as Nova's mother. And that was enough. It started with a headline. Marlowe wasn't even looking for it. She had opened her news app to check the weather. But there it was, buried halfway down the feed between local events and real estate ads. Bank executive under investigation for fraudulent client dealings. There was a photo.
Chris.
Still in a blazer, still wearing the same smug smile, but this time, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. Marlowe blinked twice, then clicked the article. According to the story, a whistleblower had come forward accusing several mid-level bank employees of falsifying paperwork to manipulate loan approvals. Chris's name was mentioned directly, along with 2 others. The article included phrases like possible suspension pending internal audit and under formal review by compliance board. Marlowe didn't know whether to laugh or feel sick. So this is how it comes back around. She closed the app and stared out the kitchen window where Nova was banging her toy blocks together on the rug. A soft voice inside whispered, "You didn't have to do a thing. Life handles its own debts." The news spread faster than wildfire in their small city. 3 days after the article went live, Samuel came home from the hardware store carrying a pack of screws and a look of concern. "Heard about Chris," he said, dropping the bag on the counter. "You didn't hear it from me," Marlowe replied. Samuel smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it. Do you think he'll go to jail?" "That's not our business anymore." But it felt like it was, because for so long, Marlowe had felt powerless.
Now,
the universe was tilting back just slightly in her favor. A week later, she received a message. From Scarlett's mother. "You probably saw the news. I don't know what's true and what's not. But I do know he stopped sending money 2 months ago. Now I'm stuck with rent and a 6-month-old and no answers. If you know anything, please. Marlowe stared at the message. She thought about the day in the park. The woman's sunglasses. Her detachment. She thought about the shared silence between Nova and Scarlett, two babies caught in the debris of adult chaos. He's still the same man, Marlowe replied. Just with fewer places to hide now. She didn't offer comfort. But she didn't offer cruelty either. That, in itself, felt like growth. 3 weeks after the story broke, Chris called. It was the first time he had used his voice in months. Marlowe almost didn't answer. But curiosity, no, clarity went out.
Hey.
There was a long pause. She heard wind in the background, maybe the sound of traffic. He wasn't calling from home. He might not even have one. I didn't do all of it, he said quietly. But I didn't stop it either. That sounds about right. They're cutting me loose. No severance. No references. Just gone. That also sounds about right. He laughed, bitter and tired. You enjoying this? No, Marlowe said honestly. I'm just not bleeding for you anymore. Another pause. I lost everything, Marlowe. That's not true. What do you mean? You still have 2 daughters. I don't even know how to be their father anymore. You never did, she said. But now you've got no excuse not to learn. And you? I've got peace. I've got clarity. And I've got Nova. That's more than enough. She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. Later that evening, Marlowe sat with Nova in her lap, brushing her daughter's fine hair with a soft bristle brush. You know, she whispered, karma doesn't always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it shows up with silence, with consequences wrapped in calm. Nova cooed and leaned into her mother's chest. Chris didn't disappear, but he did go quiet. No more weekend visits. No birthday cards. No follow-up calls. He faded. Scarlett's mother eventually filed for child support. Marlowe saw her name in a court registry search, filed under custody enforcement. She felt no joy, just closure. And yet, karma wasn't just about retribution. Sometimes it was about reward. Because one Sunday afternoon, as Marlowe sat at a local bookstore cafe sipping lukewarm chamomile while Nova napped in her stroller, she met someone. His name was Ellis. He was 35, a high school counselor with kind eyes and a quiet way of speaking. They reached for the same copy of The Alchemist. Good taste, he said. Good omen, she replied. They didn't fall in love that day, but they laughed. And Marlowe realized for the first time in years, that laughter could be shared with someone who didn't want to control it. A few days later, he messaged her. That baby in the stroller was yours, right? She has your eyes. And her dad's stubborn chin. Well, the eyes win. She smiled. Nova turned 1 that winter. There was no grand party, no overpriced decorations. Just a small table in Samuel's backyard. Balloons tied to garden chairs. A simple vanilla cake with messy icing and a single candle. Marlowe held Nova in her arms while everyone sang. And when it came time to blow out the candle, she whispered her wish. May she never forget how much she is loved. And then they both leaned in and blew together. Spring arrived quietly. There was no dramatic thaw, no sudden explosion of cherry blossoms. Just the slow retreat of frost from the edges of the windows, the subtle return of birdsong in the morning, and the soft hum of something new in the air. Marlowe felt it before she saw it. A shift. A loosening. It had been a 1.5 years since she left the house she once called a home. Since she walked away from a man she once believed would grow into someone better. Since she stepped, terrified but determined, into single motherhood with nothing but a child and her father's front porch. And now things were still. Still wasn't boring. Still wasn't quiet. Still was safety. Still meant peace. Nova was walking now unsteadily, arms out like wings, as if every step were a question she was daring the universe to answer. She babbled constantly, some mixture of real words and secret languages only toddlers could understand. She called Samuel Pop Pop. She called the vacuum cleaner SHHHH monster. And she called Marlowe Mama with a softness that melted every scar. One evening, Marlowe found herself sitting on the porch steps as Nova toddled through the yard, chasing butterflies that hadn't quite bloomed yet. Samuel came out, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You look like someone waiting for a sign," he said, handing her one. Marlowe took a sip. "Maybe I am." "Anything in particular?" "Just proof that I'm not standing still." Samuel looked at Nova, giggling as she tried to hug a dandelion. "Seems like you're growing roots," he said. "You ever notice that plants don't make a sound when they bloom? Still, one day they just are." That night, Marlowe dreamed of her old house. In the dream, she walked through it barefoot. The wallpaper peeled. The lights flickered. She opened the door to Nova's old nursery, but instead of toys, there were boxes labeled regret and what if and too late. She turned around and found a different door, one that hadn't been there before. It was warm to the touch, quiet, waiting. She opened it, and sunlight poured in. When she woke, she knew. The next day, Marlowe sat down and wrote the last letter she would ever write to Chris. Not to send, but to let go. "You gave me one beautiful thing, Nova. And maybe that was the only good thing you had to give. I spent too long waiting for the man I loved to return. Turns out he never existed, not really. But I do thank you for teaching me what I will never accept again. I hope you find whatever redemption looks like for you. But that journey is yours, not mine.
Goodbye."
She sealed it, burned it, watched the ash scatter like freedom Ellis hadn't pushed. They had gone on 6 quiet, thoughtful dates over the course of 4 months. Coffee shops, art galleries, farmers markets. Always public, always gentle. He never asked about Chris. He only asked about Nova. What makes her laugh the hardest? What's her favorite food this week? Does she like music? Marlowe watched him kneel to tie Nova's shoes one afternoon, his fingers fumbling but patient. "I don't want to rush anything," he told her later. "But I do want to grow something real." She nodded. "Real is all I'll accept." One Saturday, Ellis brought over a small planter box and said, "For Nova's window. I thought she might want her own garden." Inside were tiny tulip bulbs,
Purple and white.
Marlowe helped Nova press them into the soil, her small fingers careful and curious. "These will sleep for a while," Marlowe explained. "But when they wake up, they'll be beautiful." Nova clapped and said, "Bloom boom." And just like that, the phrase stuck. Every day after, Nova would peer into the planter and whisper, "Boom yet." On Nova's 2nd birthday, the tulips bloomed. Every single one. Marlowe stared at them through the window, her hand resting lightly on Nova's shoulder. The child beamed, squealed, and danced in circles on the floor. Boom, boom, boom. And Marlowe whispered to herself, "So, this is what healing looks like." Chris sent a card. No gift. No phone call. Inside, it simply said, "Happy 2nd birthday, Nova. I hope you're happy. I hope you're safe. Love, Dad." Marlowe read it once, then tucked it away in a folder labeled Nova's history. Not Nova's heart. That belonged to people who stayed. Ellis came to the party. He brought a music box that played Claire de Lune and a hand-painted card shaped like a butterfly. Samuel grilled hot dogs. Nova smeared frosting in her hair. And Marlowe, for the first time in what felt like years, laughed with her whole chest. Later, after the cake and cleanup, she sat alone under the string lights while Nova napped upstairs. Ellis sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "You're not the same person I met." Marlowe turned to him. "Good or bad?" "Neither. Just more. Like you found pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing." She nodded. "That's what pain does. Breaks you apart. But sometimes the rebuild is stronger." Ellis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet." Marlowe laughed. "Okay, then what is that?" He handed it to her. Inside was a tiny gold ring, delicate, simple, and engraved with one word, "Bloom." "For Nova," he said.
"For you."
"For whatever comes next." She blinked back tears. You're not trying to fix me, are you? No, he said. You're already whole. I'm just glad I get to witness it. Spring turned to summer. The tulips wilted. Nova grew taller. Marlowe's hair lightened in the sun. Her heart did.
2.
There were still hard days. Single motherhood didn't come with guidebooks or guarantees. But there was laughter. There was stability. There was love, not the breathless, reckless kind that had once made her lose herself, but the slow-burning, steady kind that helped her find her way back. And that, more than anything, was enough. On a quiet morning in July, Marlowe stood in the backyard, Nova asleep on her shoulder, Ellis beside her, Samuel sipping tea from the porch. She looked around, the blooming garden, the wind chimes, the faint sound of Nova's breath, and smiled.
No fireworks. No applause.
Just peace. The quiet bloom. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.